I love you because the entire universe conspired to help me find you. Sonic woke up that day feeling strangely refreshed, despite that he'd stayed up late last night having a pillow fight with Tom, and they declared war on one another. It ended up in a tickle fight, Maddie having headed down the stairs to scold the pair of them, though when she saw just how much fun the pair were having, decided it best to have a talk with her husband in private instead. There were protests of
Dade.
and
I'm too old for this.
and, of course, the typical.
Put me down.
Overall, he was having a great time, squeals and laughs of delight emitting from his lungs, cheeks blazing due to how hard he was cackling. He remembered the way his father had placed him down and let out a dramatic sigh of defeat.
Sorry, bud, looks like I've got a damn mistake.
Then he placed a kiss to Sonic's forehead, gave him one last squeeze. He got back up, turned and headed over to Maddie, of whom had a horrified expression spread across her face. He'd laugh at that, watching as his mother and father left, his heart warm, laying there for a moment, staring up at the glowing stars he'd had stuck to the ceiling. The teen hog felt something tug almost harshly at his heart. He had no idea what it was, disregarding it to be his disappointment considering it was the last day of summer break. Of course, he'd had a great time, but some part of him had wanted for it to end. He was looking forward to school the next day, sure, but that was mostly because he had gym class last period. The worst part, which was always the worst part of school, was that he'd have to be away from his family. Another memory on his very first day of school, how he was so hesitant to hop out of the truck.
Sonic.
Tom's hand on his shoulder, and Sonic turned his head to meet his father's gaze.
You okay?
He hesitated, inhaling a shaky breath.
Yeah, oh, I'm fine.
Though Tom seemed to initially buy it, there was still a suspicion within his eyes at the pointed look he gave his son.
Oh.
There was a pause, a moment of silence as he took his hand away. Sonic finally gave in.
Okay.
Raised his hands in surrender, before letting them drop back down to his sides, instead deciding to fiddle with the straps of his neon blue backpack with a darker blue lightning bolt stitched into the back.
I don't want to leave you. I didn't want to leave home.
His voice barely above a whisper, too ashamed to meet his father's eyes, a hand ruffling his head fur.
Sonic, it cut me for a sec.
It took him a moment, but he did.
I know that this is going to be hard for you, but I promise I'll be here as soon as you're out of school, okay?
He gave a meek nod, taking in his father's words and feeling a little better than he did before.
Okay.
Tom held out a fist, proving this statement.
Just show me that how that power bum.
No hesitation whatsoever as Sonic reached out his own fist, their knuckles bumping against one another's.
You always know how to get me to agree to something.
That got a hearty laugh out of him, and he sent him a wink.
Of course I'll do. I'm your dad.
He reached over, booped his nose.
It's my duty.
That, and you tell the worst dad jokes ever.
Aghast this time, one so dramatic Sonic knew he'd be in for a hug battle after they were back home until Sonic admitted that.
Fine, your jokes are mediocre.
The outcome was Tom tightening the embrace, swishing Sonic's face into his chest before letting him down to smooth out his muzzle fur.
That's what I thought.
And Sonic rolling his eyes, Tom giving him a smirk, before he zoomed up the stairs into his room, shouting down,
I was just kidding.
Sonic, breakfast is ready.
Maddie's voice called up from the bottom floor, prompting for Sonic's cue to get out of bed, zip down the stairs. He jumped the last 2 steps, skidding into the kitchen and taking a seat upon the island, right next to Tails.
Morning, Wood.
Tom's smile ignited sparks of delight within Sonic's eyes as the men headed past him, mug of coffee in one hand, his free one stroking Sonic's quills.
Morning, Helmut Lord.
A nickname he had used in a while, returning the smile all the same.
And good morning to you, pretzel lady.
He regarded his mother, then turned his attention to the fox kit next to him, who was using a screwdriver on a small box in front of him.
What you're working on, Tails?
Ruffling his head fur in the same way Tom always did to him.
What is the word used?
Tinkering.
Tails informed Knuckles, Pongu stuck out to the right side of his muzzle in concentration.
Yes, tinkering, with one of his latest inventions.
Sonic gave another grin, pride glinting evidently within his eyes.
Oh, you're always inventing something, huh?
Placed a hand upon Tails' shoulder, just like Tom did with him. Tom returned to the kitchen, standing in front of the kitchen island and leaning forward on his arms, mug no longer in hand, raised a brow.
Tails.
His ears flattened, and he took the box from off the table.
Sorry, Tom.
Flew down from his stool to place his screwdriver and the box beneath his seat. Upon returning to sit down on his seat, all 3 aliens were staring intently at Tom, Maddie working her breakfast maggot behind him.
So, now that I have your attention,
He began.
me and Maddie have something to tell you, once you guys have had breakfast anyway.
The trio shared an expression of betrayal, jaws collectively dropped.
Oh, come on, Dad.
Sonic spoke first.
You can't just lead us on like that.
He let out a soft laugh, a teasing smile playing on his lips as he walked past his son, patting his shoulder.
You like it, trust me, eh?
So, as soon as breakfast was on the table, pancakes topped with golden syrup and blueberries, his absolute favorite, his mother knew him so well he hurriedly chewed it down, leaving himself barely any time to breathe or swallow between bites.
Hoo-hoo, slow down there, Babby. Don't want to make yourself sick.
Maddie had gently held his wrist in her hands in an attempt to get him to slow his eating. Reluctantly, he obliged with his mother's command, though was still slightly quicker than he usually ate during breakfast. Once all 3 of them were finished with their breakfast, they individually placed their plates in the sink, leaving us eyeing Maddie to wash them before they all sped into the living room. They stood in front of Tom, of whom was perched upon the sofa, Ozzy's head in his lap as he ran his hand back and forth across the dog's back.
Why, kiddos?
He greeted them with a grin. Sonic folded his arms across his chest, not buying the innocent act from his father.
We're not here for pleasantries, Dad.
He emphasized.
We mean business. What did you mean before? What's the surprise?
Tom laughed again, so loud, in fact, that Ozzy raised his head and decided to jump off the couch, trotting off elsewhere.
Okay. Okay.
Due to the looks he was given, he relented and raised his hands as though in surrender.
But first, I got to talk about something with your mom.
There was a chorus of protest as he headed past the three boys, though he didn't stop or turn around, which made them feel betrayed all the more, Sonic the most. In fact, he felt his heart sink a little, feeling heavier than usual. Was this secret that was being kept from him bad? Was he going to be kicked out? What? No, of course not. He had to stop thinking like that. Despite that he hadn't even begun in the first place, he shook his head. Then, Tom returned to the living room, Maddie at his side, car keys in her hand.
Oh, where are we going?
It was surprisingly Tails who asked the question, his tails nervously swaying back and forth behind him.
Actually,
Tom couldn't help the smile breaking through his lips.
we're gonna be taking Sonic somewhere.
Maddie spoke next.
Knuckles, can we trust you to keep Tails safe?
To which Tails attempted to hide a snort behind his fist.
Oh, please. You should be more worried about Knuckles than me.
Knuckles instantly began declaring how it was, in fact, Tails that was being dishonorable, and before they had the chance to blow it out of the water and into a full-blown argument, Sonic stood between them.
Okay, guys, before this becomes a massive argument, why don't we all take a moment to calm down so I can be told where and why I'm being taken to wherever it is we're going?
His eyes glancing between his parents suspiciously, they only gave him innocent smiles, Tom pulling his son into a hug.
You're going to enjoy this, bud. Trust me.
A whisper in his ear released him, and Sonic noted the tears simmering atop his bottom eyelids, accompanied by a beaming smile. He knew they were tears of joy. That was enough to get Sonic to speed over to the door.
Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go.
Sonic's right foot rapidly thumping up and down on the wooden floorboards. Maddie laughed.
All right, kiddo, hold your horses.
And she reached down and ruffled his head fur, keeping her hand on his head for a moment longer than Tom usually did. That was always his mother's thing.
Your dad's just got to make sure that Knuckles won't destroy the house again.
The hedgehog couldn't help but let out a set of giggles at that, remembering how the Echidna had indeed destroyed the house, or at least part of it when they'd first met some weeks ago. Sure, it wasn't exactly the greatest memory of Knuckles, but Sonic was glad to laugh at it all the same. Tom came back into view, his shoes now on his feet.
All right.
He clapped his hands together.
We're ready to go.
Sonic had already rushed out the door and climbed into the back of the truck. His parents were more than happy at seeing their son so excited, heading over to the truck after him. Pulling out of the driveway, Sonic let his vision glaze the tree line as he was driven into the heart of town. The tweets of birds and the smell of ice cream welcoming him like the very first time he'd found Green Hills, his brow raising as they stopped in front of the town hall. He hopped out of the truck as the doors to the truck closed, Tom walking around to the other side.
Why? Why are we here?
He zipped in front of Tom and Maddie, hands expressing vague gestures to the building in front of them.
You'll see once we're inside.
Tom gave another wink. Sonic was left with a feeling of confusion burrowing deep within his mind, brows furrowing as he attempted to figure out why, staring at the floor once they were inside.
Say this.
Tom spread his arms out wide in excitement, Sonic's head swiveling around and surveying the scarcely populated space. There were only 3 other people in here. The woman tilted down her glasses, smiled.
Hey, Sheriff.
A small smile gracing her lips.
Why don't we step into my office?
Sonic followed behind his parents, attempting to appear as small as possible. He was confused. He was scared, which was a bit stupid, because heroes don't scare so easily. But what with the way his parents had been acting today, it felt very off. His parents took the 2 seats in front of a desk, with Ms. Davis taking the one behind it, and Tom pulled Sonic up into his lap, taking the opportunity. His eyes scanned the surroundings for a moment, before the woman spoke again.
So Thomas Michael and Maddie Vahovsky, sheriff and veteran of Green Hills.
She presented a piece of important-looking paper in front of them.
By signing this, you not only agreed to take care of, which, let's be honest, you have for the past 8 months.
She let out a soft laugh at her own joke.
Not to provide for the health, welfare, and educational needs.
She handed Tom a pen, taking a moment to pose.
Of Sonic Vahovsky.
She took a breath.
Do you agree to this adoption?
Sonic's heart leaped. His voice lodged in his throat as he attempted to speak, and he let out no more than a gasp. When he finally found his voice, it wobbled more than he would like.
That's why we're here.
He looked up at Tom. Between him and Maddie, his vision becoming blurry, tears welling up and stinging his eyes, Tom's gaze softening.
Well, we talked about it 10 months ago, actually, but we've never really thought about it since then. Thought we decided that now better time than ever.
Sonic.
Davis' voice instantly drew his attention back to her.
Yes?
His heart racing faster than usual.
I do need you to say something like, agree.
Sonic's eyes widened.
Oh, right. Of course I agree. I agree 1,000,000,000 times over. And I don't even think that's a real number.
Tom and Maddie laughed, with her booping his nose and him giving a tight hug. Once his father had signed the paper, Ms. Davis turned it back to face herself.
On this day.
She was handed the pen back, scribbling her own signature.
Thomas and Maddie Vahovsky have officially adopted Sonic to be their child. You now have the legal rights of any natural child. Hedgehog, I hereby sign this order confirming this adoption.
As soon as she placed the pen down, Sonic leaped out of Tom's lap, being careful to move the paper out of the way before jumping up and down on the table like a child on a sugar rush.
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh.
He squealed.
This is the best day of my life.
Then he turned to Mavis, offered his hand.
Give him 5. Oh, some legal working lady.
She laughed at his antics, giving him probably the most incredible high five someone could ever give him. Well, aside from his parents, of course, except, now, they were officially his parents, and he wouldn't have it any other way.